three fellows from the Shinnecock tribe in New York, Long Island. Shinnecock. Same tribe, all dirty bastards. Ancestors from. Alright, to his mom's side. Got that already. This is Catawba. Catawba. American Indian. Alright, shout out to Anu. This is one of his ancestors. Alright. We got an Ayamara Indian, all the way in Bolivia and Peru. And we got a Seminole. Who's the so-called Negro? Huh? We got the Chickahominy tribe. Alright? Chickahominy. This from the archives. This ain't no Photoshop.
Tonight we have as a guest Michael Hoffman II, an author of 4 books, numerous newsletters. He's also a researcher. Mike Hoffman, you have written a controversial book about They Were White and They Were Slaves. How did you come to write this book?
Well, originally I came across a book on white servitude in Virginia by a man named J.C. Bala. And I became very intrigued by his idea that white servitude was not limited to this juvenile kind of sophomoric notion that's pushed in high school, that persons of white background who were put into so-called indentured servitude had a very privileged type of bondage, and that that bondage was very temporary, and then it was ended after a period of 4 or 7 years, and they re-entered the ruling class and went about the job of exploiting black people. J.C. Bala, it's a very thin book of about 100 pages, I believe, raised the point that there were some aspects of white servitude that were consonant with slavery. There were some aspects of white servitude that were consonant with slavery.
All right, we're in part 6. From Indigenous American to African American, the Indians, aka free people of color. Talking about free Negroes, free people of color. It's just you that talking about the Indians, alright?
I would say some Native people have felt periodically the necessity of denying Africanness, but that necessity has been created by a steady stream of white originating argument about claiming that you cannot be Indian if you are also black. Initially, it was not Native people who were making that argument. Whites made that argument in the process of disinheriting Native people in various kinds of ways. And some Native people have had to feel they have had to echo those arguments to achieve any kind of regaining of their birthright.
I guess the way it works is people are so used to seeing what is depicted as an Indian within the movies, the old movies and things. So if you don't look that way, they don't expect you to be Indian. They think you're either black or Hispanic or something else. But most people don't perceive you as an Indian if you don't look like that poster type Indian that they have on TV.
Hey, all right, so real quick, because we're going to talk about it, and just want to remind you what we've gone over before. We're not talking about real slaves. We're talking about indentured servitude, all right? This is part 18 from Indigenous to American to African American series, all right? Number 18, the legal beginning of American Negro slavery, all right?
Governor Northam made a reference to the history of slavery in the Commonwealth during his CBS interview, but he didn't call the first Africans to land on Virginia's shores slaves. Take a listen.
Well, it has been a difficult week, and if you look at Virginia's history, we're now at the 400-year anniversary. Just 90 miles from here, in 1619, the first indentured servants from Africa landed on our shores in Old Point Comfort, what we call now Fort Monroe. And while in 1619, the first indentured servant, Could
comments like that affect the support among Virginians?
So remember, so this governor letting you know that these first so-called 20-odd Negroes that arrived in 1690, remember, they were indentured servants. They weren't slaves at all. They were indentured. They had a contract. All right? And that was part 18. We're continuing part 18 from Indigenous American to African American. This video had a lot of drop when we're talking about statute laws and everything and indentured servitude. And so this part of the video, we're in the book Indian Slavery in Colonial Times within the present limits of the United States, very scholarly book. All right, you can check the sources for that. All right, and we're going to talk about how they were bringing in Indians, right, and they didn't know whether to put them as servants or slaves, right? So here it goes. They're telling that, you know, these first English colonists, when they were setting up their colonies and getting or whatever they call trading, whatever, but they were buying Indians off the Spanish, right? They were selling, enslaving Indians and selling them to the English colonies, right? I've gone over this already. We already know. Again, the Spanish were enslaving American Indians mostly. I would say at least 95% of the time, you know, and not Africans. And so they were trading these with the English. The English was like, all right, well, we don't want to, you know, I guess as they're being politically correct here, call them or declare them official slaves. They just want their services, right? What they're good at, whatever they are, farming, you know, if you're a mechanic, whatever, you're a teacher, you know, whatever your service is, that's what they were employing. Because the Spanish had this almost a similar thing, even though it was basically almost slavery, how they were treating them, but they had their encomienda system, which was a type of indenture as well. And so, you know, the English right here, they began this book letting you know, again, let me just repeat that part. It says, but were content to retain possession of the services of their subject Indians without taking possession of their persons through legal declarations imposing the status of slavery upon them. Such Indians were held in the status of servitude. Such Indians were held, your ancestors, so-called Negroes, were held in the status of servitude, a condition which stood midway between freedom and absolute subjection, right, in between, either or, and which was the historic base upon which slavery, by the extension and addition of incidents, was constructed. Slavery was constructed based on this status of servitude between freedom and absolute subjection. It could have gone either way for you, and most of the time it went absolute subjection, or chattel slavery as they call it. All right, for life. All right, for life. The right of ownership of the services of both Negroes and Indians was, after all, what the colonists most desired and appeared to promise satisfaction in this instance, as it had in the case of the white indentured servants. Remember, there was white indentured servants too. Alright, so again, but listen to what they're telling you. So the right of ownership of the services of both Negroes and Indians, alright, Negroes and Indians, it's all the same. After all, what the colonists most desired and appeared to promise satisfaction in this instance, as it had in the case of the white indentured servants. They had, you know, Europeans over here as well, you know, doing their time for coming over to America. They had to do an indentured servitude for like 7 to 10 years. Indian servitude not only preceded Indian slavery, again, Indian servitude, so-called Negro, Indian, so-called Negro servitude, not only preceded Indian or colored, right? They classified you as colored or Negro slavery, but even continued after the institution of slavery was fully developed. This is true of most, if not all, of the English American colonies. All right, this was going on in all of their colonies. All their colonies practiced this before they, you know, I guess legalized slavery or created their chattel slavery. Prisoners of war, all right, because you were Indian, American, indigenous people, Niji. You were free to the land. That was everybody's, right? The land, nobody owned the land. You were free to roam, all right? So they took you in captivity. They made you a servant, eventually slave, eventually, right, in parentheses, and now, you know, you're a POW, you're a prisoner of war, right? It was war declared upon you. Do you know the history of the U.S.? It is certainly true of Maryland, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Statutory recognition of slavery in general by the English American colonies occurred as follows. Alright, so again, when they started recognizing statutory slavery, alright, so it says in Massachusetts it began in 1641, alright, by Connecticut in 1650, by Virginia in 1661 in Virginia, by Maryland in 1663, by New York and New Jersey in 1664, by South Carolina in 1682, by Pennsylvania and Rhode Island in 1700, by North Carolina 1715, and by Georgia in 1755. But the legislation of these dates did not always include the subject Indians. When such was the case, however, according to a strict legal interpretation, any subject Indian, if enslaved, had the right to demand his freedom from the colonial courts, such as an instance existed in the case of Virginia, where the Acts of 1655 and 1661 specifically forbade Indian slavery and guaranteed to the subject Indians all the rights of servants.